We have no intention of cutting prices. That's certainly not part of the year. Frankly, we're coming out of 2022, which was just an outstanding year. I mean, 14% revenue growth, strong EPS. Obviously, the company is just firing on all cylinders, competing very effectively. We've got good momentum coming into the year, but we're also well aware of the fact that, in a high interest rate environment, it could start to drag on consumer spending at some point.
That was PepsiCo's chief financial officer with a notably cautious tone for 2023, given the high interest rate environment. Now, restaurants and food service industries are facing similar headwinds as consumer spending comes into question. On individual earnings calls, restaurants noted labor shortages and cost pressures as the near-term challenges. Well, for more on how restaurants are planning to overcome these hiccups, let's get to DatumFS Principal David Maloni. David, good to have you on the show here. So obviously we had quite a few restaurant earnings coming out this week, trying to get a gauge on the industry, especially when it comes to fast food. When you look at what happened with Yum Brands, we saw they were boosted by their Taco Bell offering. Is it all about that value and whether or not companies are going to keep cutting costs here?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I think that we're certainly seeing some trade down, or at least we're hearing trade down in the industry, at least from full service into limited service dining as consumers become more challenged.
And so what about supply chain issues? Because we'll break that down. We'll get to labor in a second. But what about supply chain issues? How are they working their way through the restaurant business at the moment? Yeah,
so the supply chain has improved. Obviously, COVID was a big disruptor for it, but supply chain has improved. Two main parts of that being the cost pressures and then execution. Cost pressures for a lot of items, including chicken and pork items, have come down, whereas execution, a lot of the shortages have been alleviated. We're also seeing some weakness in global trade with the Baltic Dry Index and Halbert Index. And so we're seeing some favorable things there, but we're not all the way back yet.
And then, of course, when you look at food inflation, at the moment for your average consumer, it ends up being cheaper to eat out and try and get a value meal somewhere else versus, what we're seeing with the price of things like eggs at the moment and even orange juice starting to tick up as well. So what are you seeing in terms of some of the cost pressures that companies are trying to adapt to and how food inflation is still affecting them?
Yeah, so it's certainly been a big factor for food service during the last year and will continue to be a big factor. Probably the biggest thing I'm watching is grains, because that's one of your principal costs for the major exposures for the restaurants, which are proteins and dairy, including eggs. Grain prices are still inflated. World grain supplies are very limited. But the good news is that there's just a tremendous incentive for farmers to plant and produce this year. And we're starting to see that in South America with the pending crops. And we'll likely see that with the crops and the harvest this fall in the U.S.
And obviously, you still have a very tight labor market at the moment. What sort of pressures are still on the restaurant industry when you compare the fast food restaurants to perhaps the high-end ones?
Yeah, so we as an industry certainly are having to pay more, just like everybody else. But we also are getting much better at how we execute and looking at costs and looking at staffing and looking at hours. And so I think in the end, we will come out of this better with better employees, and I think it will enhance the industry.
Now, something that you're also seeing some challenges when it comes to warehouses. A lot of people looking at the role that AI can really play in perhaps anticipating some supply chain challenges, perhaps even issues further out in the supply chain. Talk about the role of AI here, because a lot of people might think, perhaps it can help with some things, but it seems like it has a lot of more broader implications for this industry than are currently being applied.
Sure. AI, in my opinion, certainly has a place in the food service supply chain, but it's going to take some time. There's not a set data taxonomy for the food service supply chain. So in other words, the data is very messy, but the good news is that it is attracting a lot of attention, whether that's talent and investment, private equity and venture capital that are trying to attack this. And, I think down the road, AI will play a big part. Currently, I think what you're seeing is a lot of, as far as the supply chain stretching all the way to the consumer, you're seeing a lot of that data focus by the industry on the consumer. And I think that will slowly make its way back up the supply chain.
Because you have to wonder, obviously, with farming, they have to look years in advance, something that might be difficult for AI to anticipate. How do you see that aspect of the supply chain being affected by AI when it comes to restaurants?
Well, look, the better the data that can become and the better the collaboration can become, the better all parties in the supply chain can execute. And that's all the way back to the farmer. So I see that enhancing as we move forward over the next several years.
And of course, I want to ask you about a big game coming up on Sunday. A lot of people getting their chicken wings, getting their supplies ready. I wanted to get your take on that. We've seen, obviously, even though some of these poultry prices have gone up because of the avian flu, not affecting the flocks that are dealing with chicken wing prices. Thankfully, those have gone down. What are your picks as to what you think is going to do well, whether it's restaurants or things that you expect people to perhaps pick up and have on delivery for the Super Bowl?
Well, I mean, chicken wing prices are at their lowest levels heading into the Super Bowl since 2003. This will be only the seventh time we go into the Super Bowl with the wholesale chicken wing market below $1 a pound. So I think chicken wings, we're planning on smoking chicken wings on Sunday for the big game. And my guess, chicken wings will play a large part, as well as typical event items, pizza, hamburgers, et cetera, for the Super Bowl.